Over to you, Karlin.
Thank you, Andrea. So this, of course, is going to be just kind of my favorite bits because it's a huge topic in some ways. But, oh, come on, advance the slide. That's a good not start, isn't it? I have to use the arrows. There we go. So I suppose the first thought experiment that I would just like you to launch into is actually imagine your most difficult ensemble, and for whom are you arranging? I'm not going to be grammatically correct here. I'm thinking about whether it's instrumentalists or singers, and what their strengths and weaknesses are, and what their likes and dislikes are. And while I let that ferment in the back of your mind, I'll tell you my kind of first introduction to having to think in those terms was when I was a clarinet major, but doing the subjects for non-majors in composition. And they were taught by Bill Smith, who was Dave Brubeck's clarinetist, no slouch player. And we spent most of the year writing for a quartet of 2 clarinets, Bill and myself, and a violinist who was a master's student, and a violist who hadn't learned to play with vibrato yet and was kind of, big heart, really enthusiastic guy on his way to become a music teacher. And I'm sure he was fantastic, but his viola playing was a little out of sync with the others of us. And it was a case of, if I wanted this to sound good, I have to write to what he can do. And if I'm writing harmonies that are a little unconventional and I want it to be in tune or balanced, I actually have to make that chord have an open string. And so, it wasn't putting him down or begrudging it. It was just writing to the reality of it and knowing that I had one of the world's greatest clarinet players in the ensemble as well. And it was a good mind shift. And if this piece is going to sound good, it's got to be written for these human beings. So I guess that's why I've said who rather than what are you arranging for, to really think about those human beings. What are their strengths and weaknesses? What are their likes and dislikes? How much can you actually write for that, those aspects of their humanness as well as the things they play or sing. So that's thought number 1. And I think that's a healthy place to keep coming back to. Thought number 2 is, what's the purpose for this arrangement or composition? So, all of this really applies to composing as well, because I think composing is probably about 80% arranging anyhow. So just let that carry over. So are you doing this for, an educational purpose to lift their skills or expand their knowledge or extend? Because that's going to involve different sort of choices and different sort of materials. Maybe I'm writing a piece where the violist finally actually does play vibrato on one note just to get the hang of it. Or is it a performance product? Like you've got to have something for an assembly, or for what sort of purpose? You have the ambassador from Iceland coming and you've got to quick whip up an arrangement of the national anthem. That isn't insulting. So I think being clear about that is really important. And just some ways to think about being clear about it. If you're thinking about that performance product, how much learning time is really available? And where does it happen? In your class session or in breakouts at home? Is this going to be virtual or live? So you're also creating to those factors and those constraints. If it's an education objective consideration, are you embedding development of skills or particular understandings in the piece so they can experience what you're trying to get them to understand? Does it maybe need some preparatory exercises or games to work on that part of the concept so then they can put it in the piece and make it work? So I've done that with a few pieces where, there's a thing that's kind of important and it's about well, okay, so there's one, I did a piece for concert band called Beyond the Break that some people have played and been involved in here. And it's slow and there's not anybody keeping the pulse the whole time. And so I wrote a series of kind of preparatory exercises, whether anybody uses them or not, we never know, but at least it's there. Because I realized that one of those things was for a young band being able to keep that pulse internally is a bit of an exercise, that's a new skill. So let's work on that separately before it makes the piece fall apart. So, for that one, needed that. There was also a bit where the trumpets needed to use their tuning slide. And again, with that piece, I actually interviewed a bunch of tutors who were working with instrumentalists at the school that I was writing it for, and said, what's something that they need to learn? It was written for a band of players that had been playing under a year. And so, they gave me this list of kind of technical exercise things that would be nice to include. So the brass players actually opened the piece buzzing down fourths on their mouthpieces. The clarinetists are going over the break, but just by playing a low note and adding the key. The saxophonists are learning to use the G sharp key and go low as possible. And there was something for every one of them that was a little technical thing to build in. So there was a few preparatory exercises for that. Now, the reality of your students, of course, is that they're not all moving at the same pace or have the same skill set, even on the same instrument. So this is another thing I discovered. I thought I'd share this fail, no, not quite. For the same band, I'd been asked to do an arrangement of the 12 Days of Christmas for primary school end of year assembly thing. And so they're going to play a different day's worth or so between the different classes coming and do their presentations. And like a normal person, I wrote first and second parts, and you put the high part on the top and the lower part on the bottom. And because it was a whole bunch of ambitious kids, they all wanted to play first. And so we had most of the band playing the melody only. So for the next piece, I thought, no, I actually need to have the structure of the piece secure. So instead of calling them first and second, I called them essential and tricky parts. And that kind of gives you authority to say, well, I know you can play something harder, but this is what we need to make the piece work, and get them to sort of listen to that. And then, of course, some of the ambitious players asked for extra tricky parts, so I just wrote those too. But so this is a one page of the score for that. It's called Beyond the Break, and if you look to about bar 4 or 5, you can see that there's so for the flutes, clarinets, and alto saxophones, there are essential ESS and tricky parts, and it's not a big shift at this stage, but like for the alto sax, the tricky part just goes up an octave for part of the bar. But that's, that might be too tricky for the essential player, and that's okay. The clarinet tricky one, they get to go up, they're over the break thing, and they get to play another fingering that, the other ones haven't done yet. And then they get to wobble around on it for a while. But if everybody tried to do those tricky ones, then the piece wouldn't have its structure. So I'm going to try to play just a little bit of that, which means I'm going to stop this screen share. And just because it's music and I should try to play something, right? So let's see if I can get that to work. Make sure the share sound button's still activated. It is. So this is starting just before that page shows up, which of course you can't see now. So you've got to remember it. Haha, sorry. Okay, back to the other. Here we go. I'm going to get good at this. So you can hear how slow the pulse was on that. And there's, not your bass drum and snare drum holding them together. So those were the kinds of things they had to work with. All right. So thinking about arranging, the first thing, or probably primary one, I think that for making it work and making it sound convincing and making your students feel good about it, like they've done something convincing, is timbre. And thing one is to balance the intensity and sustain or opacity of the different instrumental sounds. So it's really tricky, for example, to get a euphonium and classical guitar duet to work because of the intensity, the opaqueness, the solidness of that euphonium sound and the quick decay and the lower volume of acoustic guitar. That's my extreme example. But I think that's something that's really worth thinking about. And that's not just something that's absolute to those instruments. That's how it works for your players. So you might have, oboe player that can't play soft yet. So they're going to be in that ultimate intensity zone, right? And maybe you have to pair them up with the electric guitar with the distortion pedal. I don't know. But find ways to make that work. Now, this is also something that I'm just going to throw out. I think it makes a huge difference when you're doing sort of classroom composition or arranging exercises or improv. Friendship groups are great, but you can kind of success proof them a little bit by taking some care to match up instruments that have a good chance of sounding good together. So you put the ones that have, a sharp attack but quick decay probably together, because otherwise they're going to get lost with the instruments that can sustain and hold a really fat sound. Just thinking about that kind of thing can make a huge difference in how effective the piece feels. So tessitura kind of takes that whole idea just a little bit farther within the instrument. And the principle that's just worth hanging on to there is that whatever range or part of that range of that instrument that you can play really well, that you can actually play soft and loud and easily, is the one where they'll be most able to be expressive, most able to be responsive to other instructions, and have the best chance of balancing. So for some instruments, like the clarinet, the low register is really easy to control, and the high register isn't. But for a lot of instruments, like the saxophone, the low register, the very low notes are really hard to control. So if blending is an issue, or your dynamic shape's important, or it's a tricky rhythm even, the more they've got to dedicate their brain cells to how is this sound going to work, the less they've got for other elements and aspects. So it might mean that, for some students, you save by all means, have your saxophone players play low, but don't make them play soft if they can't do it, so you have that in a loud part. And when it's got to be sweet and it's got to blend, you put it where it's easiest. And then, there's also issues with what parts of the register of the instrument are easiest to play in tune. So you can take that into account again, just to kind of success proof it. That sounds like it's a lot of thinking and a lot of work, but you probably have a sense, if you've heard them play individually at all, of what their strongest zones are. So use that for when they've got to do other musical things. And then you take the weak ones and you put them into textures where it can handle that. It can handle the extra loud, or it can handle the erratic, but it might not speak on time type stuff or be out of tune. Create some spaces where that can be done. So, and then another little timbre trick is that thinking about, I'm going to talk about instrumentalists mostly here, but if, like, say, you've got a large ensemble, if you want something to move to the foreground, it's going to work best if it's all the same color. That might be all brass or all woodwind or all flute or something like that. But as soon as you blend them, it becomes less intense, less incisive, and it moves to the background naturally. So if you look at good concert band arrangements of orchestral pieces, for example, they'll take the saxophones and euphoniums and low clarinets and have them all playing that kind of string wash and to put it in the background. If you want something to be at the foreground, make it just the trumpets or just the oboes or just the clarinets or something. So assuming that you've got enough variety of colors to blend, just remember that one. If you want something to be accompaniment, blend it. And if you want it to be a lead, don't. And naturally there's exceptions to all of that, but that was something that I didn't learn till master's study, and it would have been nice to have known it earlier, but there we go. Voicing of chords or harmonic structures, you're going to get more clarity if you kind of follow the overtone series, which essentially means big intervals in the low registers, low range, and you have your smaller ones up top. If you don't want clarity, if you want mud or you want thick or you want that kind of energy, then do exactly the opposite. Have a big thick chord down there in the low bit. And you can feel that like you play the piano. If you play a triad, way down left-hand world, it's a lot furrier, fuzzier, grittier than it is up in the top. Works the same. So clarity isn't always a virtue. Just know what has those effects, I suppose. And because major and minor triads are built in relation to the overtone series more directly than other harmonic structures, it's worth just maybe being aware of that. A lot of this stuff is like, if it's not working, what else should I look at, rather than using that prescriptively. Use it diagnostically to fix something that wasn't quite being what you thought it would be. Texture. How many distinct lines? Start with 2 and only add more if you have to. So reinforce things rather than complicate them. That's a little bit facetious, but I unfortunately do have to admit that some of the pieces that I've done that started as duets happen to be the most effective. It annoys me because I kind of like complexity, but yeah, the duets worked better. That said, when you're doing an arrangement, you're probably putting it into some sort of existing recognizable style. And so have a think about what are the necessary roles for that. If it's going to be a tango, what do you need to have? You need to have something that evokes a bass part, perhaps, or not. Traditional tango music doesn't use bass players, but somehow we all feel that there is one. It doesn't always use bass players. What are the kind of chord things that happen? What kind of melodic things happen? Or, if it's a rock, you need something conveying the steady beat and the backbeat. So it's not necessarily a straight across thing, but identify what are the roles that have to be covered for me to feel like I'm in that style. So let's say we're doing a swing. I need something that does what a walking bass does. And I need something that does what the ding, 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 ding cymbal does. Maybe. And I probably need something that's got some chords that are kind of juicy and a little bit punchy. So I've got that walking energy, which is propelling the thing. And it's signposting the harmony, but not being slavish to it. I've got some chords that are both percussive and giving me some of the harmony. And I've got something that's just keeping that drive going as well, that it's a little bit more detailed. all of those things could be done in all the wrong instruments. And I think that's worth thinking about. You could put your walking bass line in a flute. And if it's got that push and that energy, it's going to do the job. It's going to be a little unconventional, but it's going to do the job. Yeah. You can do the effect of the chords, the kind of punchy bump, bump, bump kind of stuff. That could be, I don't know, it could be on xylophones. So pushing that somewhere else. It's hard to do drums not on drums, but it could be beatbox. Or if the essential thing is just that hi-hat on 2 and 4, that could happen in something else that's just a little bit crunchy. And it might be a guitar. It might be a chord that's mostly just attack, and it's got intervals that are close enough that we don't hear it as a chord. So all that's to say is that, if this style usually has a bass line, I'm going to put that in my lowest instrument and hope for the best. That's probably a good place to start, but it doesn't, there might be other ways. The main thing is that you've thought about what's absolutely essential for us to feel like we're in this style, and that you've covered that. And you don't need to feel like you have to be literal about everything else. Your job is to get the listener to imagine that we're in that style, not for you to replicate it necessarily. So one of my fun things, I don't know if anybody else does, to do is, I think I've done it twice, is to go in and stir up a beginning band program and take the good old, songs from the first book, and we'll just improvise accompaniments to them. So you can improvise, you can quickly create on the fly a "We Will Rock You" type beat, and that improves "Row, row, row your boat" immensely. You can create a tango type feel pretty quickly, again, just with sort of a bass line and maybe a few long notes, and that improves Clair de Lune immensely. So, and that's kind of a fun thing to do, and it helps keep your different ability students in those groups engaged, because they have some scope now to do some other things. So anyway, texture, harmonic language. I'm throwing a whole lot of stuff at you. I promise I can make this available. Think about whether what you're creating is familiar or unfamiliar to them. Because if they're used to only hearing, say, major, minor triads, the first time you put something in that's quartal harmony, based on fourths or other intervals, that's going to be a little challenging to believe that what they're playing is right and feel confident about it. So you can take some time sitting on those and just enjoy the feeling of it. I have a student I've been doing some Bartok duets with, second-year clarinet player. And the first times we were sitting on those seconds from the Microcosmos, he kind of squirmed and cringed, but now he really likes them because he can feel that tension release experience with it. So it takes some time to do that, but know that it's going to take some time. For singers and slidey instruments, reference pitches and intonation, it helps to support that. Voice leading actually matters for everybody, even if you are a button pusher or a key hitter, because our fingers actually do tune into the logic of melodic motion. So when it's not the main melody that people might be familiar with when you're writing harmony lines or something, if you can take into account some of those things that are well-worn, time-honored, natural approaches to melodic writing, jumping back to the gratis ad parnassum from the Renaissance, if you have a leap up and if you can come back by a step, that just feels more logical. Or a leap down, come back by a step. Those are the logics that we do naturally. So, those kind of things, that's just a small example, but the more that can feel logical, rather than I've just got to put these fingers down and hope, the easier it's going to be to happen. If there's new sharps and flats, new accidentals in the piece, if they were going to have to write them in as reminders anyway, then just don't use a key signature. Have that hint built in right there, you know? Later, when they're accustomed to those, use the key signature. They need to learn to think in key signatures, but it's kind of like you're adding a layer that maybe you don't need yet. Notation, make the main beats obvious, rhythmic spacings or eyes work in real time. Students may have never read a handwritten piece of music before in their life if you give them one. It'll be as foreign as reading cursive. So again, they can learn to do that, but thinking about their own writing or arranging, they're not, you know, it's hard to write handwritten stuff in a way that's close enough. And I'll talk about that tomorrow, some tips for getting there. But fonts, stave size should probably always be bigger than you think. If you're actually doing something long enough to require page turns, plan for them. And then find and use the software reference manual. It's all there. Well, if it's not, it's in the discussions. But most of those things, you know, just get familiar with that. But I think that's one of those things that you can save a lot of rehearsal time if that's not another obstacle, I suppose. So all of that stuff that I just said, basically, this is the principle. And this is my personal, most likely to step in it problem, that every new thing ups the difficulty level. So it accumulates. So you one little new thing, not a big deal. 2, 3, by the time we're up to 4, so we've just gone up a grade level or more, you know. And so I get excited about new possibilities and put too many in, and then all of a sudden the piece is like, you know, 50% harder than it was supposed to be. So I guess that's kind of the core of what, you know, challenge you to think about creating for your own unique assortment of students. Some of them can handle more new things because they're starting from a more solid base, or they've got more things that they don't have to think about, and give it to them. So the ones that, you know, for adding another finger is a big concentration load, don't give them something, you know, another layer or two to add on to that. Don't put it in 7/8. Do 7/8 on the notes they know. So just thinking back now to what's the purpose. So, you know, educational, consolidator, extending. I think a lot of this is kind of me thinking about everything I write. I want to add a new experience, take some people someplace they haven't been, just a little bit. And it's like, okay, how much am I extending on this? Do we have the time to, you know, really make that happen? If it's about consolidating things that they've already done, you know, that's a different agenda. You don't put extending things in there. And if it's that performance product, it's like, you can do both, but you probably want to hold back on the extending things if the end product's really the most important thing. So I hate that idea. I think we should always extend them, but yeah, no, you have to be realistic. So, okay. I'll just show you this and then I'll open it up for some questions, comments, stuff. This is from a set of cello duets I wrote. And the intention, the educational purpose here, these are not for beginners, but they're not for hugely advanced, was to get them to listen as an ensemble and to how things fit together. So there are no dynamic markings for the most part. And you'll notice that I didn't number the parts. I just gave them punctuation, but they get told what the role is in their piece. So whether it's the lead, the bass line, the backing, and those roles get rotated through the parts through the whole piece. So the top line is not always the lead, or the bottom line is not always the bass line. And there's some sections where I've actually written tutti, which means that they're all doing the same thing together. There's, reinforcing the lead, some of those kind of things. It depends. And this one's kind of, rocky, so calling it lead and backing and bass line makes sense. But the challenge, the purpose of it is for them to work out by listening how much to be, in the foreground or background, and learn to manage that. So they're kind of fun. I don't have recordings of those yet. Okay, before we get to the lies, computers, tell us. Questions, comments, contradictions. I'm open for all of those. So you can turn your mics on and fire away, or type or whatever. Or we'll just jump to the lies. But yeah, tell me about your wildly different students.
Are you opening this for comments and questions, Karlin? Sorry, I didn't quite understand the last thing.
Yeah, it's just right now, just for a few minutes. I thought this might be a good time to open up for comments and questions, and then I'll go back to the next stuff. So,
can I just say how encouraging I found all of this, and how extremely useful. Most of my research work focuses in exactly this area, which I call polytechnicality, which is music for musicians of different levels of technical ability to play at the same time. There is, in terms of commercial publishing, almost nothing. The assumption is that every single child in the band is equally good on their instrument. And we all know that they're not. And when you read, I've read literature which talks about things like the spectre of parts of differing technical levels in the same piece. It's not a spectre, it's an angel. It's essential. So to hear your thoughts on this was absolutely wonderful, and I'm glad that there are more people involved in this area. And my experience as well is that one doesn't have to be a composer in a formal sense to make this work. A good music educator can make this work for their ensemble without having to have a master's degree in composition or something like that. So, forgive me if it's not a very specific technical question, but I just would like to, express my thanks and for such an encouraging presentation.
Thanks, Jim. I think one of the things that we do kind of cop here in Australia is instrumental methods that are geared for an American rhythm of teaching, which is, meeting every day.
Yes.
For 40, 45 minutes or something like that. And so you have instant retention, and it's all large ensemble. One of the things that does happen there are remarkable gaps. As you can hear from my accent, that's where I learned to play. And it doesn't cater for students who come at it with instrumental experience or musical singing experience or reading experience or theoretical experience from other sources. And so there's a huge boredom potential as well. And you'll lose the kids who are more curious or could do more out of your program because it moves too slow. So in a lot of ways, we need to be able to accommodate them so they have a meaningful experience and stay in the game. And I just noticed Rachel's comment here about showing students how to make their parts simpler. This is a marvelous product that is far too expensive, but it's actually, let's see if I can get this to show up in the camera. It's a roll of Post-it type tape.
Karlin, just move it a bit closer to the camera if you can.
How's that? Is that showing up?
Yep, that's better.
Okay, so it's a roll of tape with a stave on it. You can replace all the notes you don't like easy. Let your students have it that. Rewrite their parts. Yeah, and that's certainly that thing, Rachel, about playing the first note of each bar is really good because it keeps them reading ahead. And that's fabulous for your oral training down the track, and you can start to fill in the other notes as you can do more of them, or patterns. So yeah, it's that asymmetrical, asynchronous development. Kids that switch to other instruments are also going through the experience of, I was good at piano and I'm not at trombone, and I feel bad about that. So we need environments that encourage that, variety. And if our music doesn't reinforce that, you're not good, that would really help. Or that, just tall poppy, shut up and play the long notes, So, yeah. Anybody else?
Chris, can you just take your hand off, just take yourself off mute if you want to chat?
Had to find the right spot. So, yeah, a couple of things. When we've got first, second, and third clarinet, first, second, and third trumpet, those instruments are sort of catered for in different levels of difficulty. But you're not going to have first, second, and third tuba, or first, second, and third bari sax. And unfortunately, publishers take the middle ground. They want to put parts for those instruments, but they know if they make it, say a first baritone sax part as hard as a first clarinet part, there'll be some bari saxes that can't play it. And so those poor instruments miss out all the time on not getting to play as hard a part as some of their peers.
Yeah, I think the publishing dilemma is really, really tough, because you don't get to tailor it. It's one of those things that I would love to do is, and I know it's completely uncost effective, but, to write the short score and then say, all right, what are the strengths and weaknesses in your band this year? Let me do the arrangement. Yeah, and then do it the next year because it's different, Yeah.
You'll get that on a commissioned work where you can slant it towards the strengths of their stronger players and sort of tame it down for the weaker players, but it still has to be commercially sellable to somebody else.
Yeah. I think that's just an inherent clash of values. Yeah. So, and maybe there needs to be overtly some more, official flexibility or for the rights of adaptation for teachers to customize, because, technically that's pretty strict right now. Yeah, definitely. There's a question that's come up about writing percussion parts. Is your session on that happened yet, Chris? Or is that yet to come? I forgot the schedule.
Right. Both of my sessions are accessible at any time.
That's true. Okay.
And it's probably better to do the Nourish Your Percussionist one first. But they were both a bit disastrous because I'd never used Zoom before, and the second one nearly didn't happen at all because we were in lockdown and the school was closed, and I had to get special permission and special permits to go into the school, which I got, but a lot of the instruments weren't there, and nobody was there to run the camera or work the sound, so a lot of the sounds didn't come through. It was a bit of a disaster, but I think even though it's poor quality videoing, some of the concepts will be of interest. And there's some handouts. On the first one, there's quite a few handouts too.
So make sure you check that out. One of the things that I just like to throw into that, the questions coming up about writing percussion parts, is the limitation in what's, in your beginning ensembles is the rhythmic notation that that's been introduced at that stage. And why not let them improvise? they're going to play something that's a whole lot more interesting, and they can write it down the track, you know? So they got this pattern, and you have this great teaching moment of, you know, okay, do that, but this is what it looks like. And now all of a sudden you've learned to that semi-quaver, quaver, semi-quaver thing. That sounds like this. I know how to read that. It's not going to show up till book 3 or sometime, but let them do that, because it is the most boring place to be. My son was there. He was a behavior problem. So, and he was happiest when he, you know, on one of the concerts, they had the percussion set up differently from what he was accustomed to. And his music actually was on the other side of the stage. So he just improvised. It worked fine. And I think that helps, you know, cultivate them listening to how they fit in the whole mix and stuff too. So, all right, I might just keep motoring through here just briefly. There's not a huge amount left, but I've promised I've promised in the abstract to do an arrangement live, which I'm not going to do, but I am going to do the thinking out loud kind of stuff. So you can hear what my brain would have done if I was creating it on paper. So jumping back to the, oops, she says maybe, the lies the computer tells us. I think it's just always worth remembering that there are a lot of those. There's a lot of truths too. But when you're thinking about arranging for your idiosyncratic ensemble, these are the things that I think are most important to remember, that you've just been lied to when it plays back to you. The balance has nothing to do with your reality. The timbre is both, you know, for some things it's much more complementary than reality. Usually marimbas, timpani, and flutes sound better than yours ever will. And the saxophones will never sound that bad. Well, maybe they will, but you know, there's samples, particularly if you're, you know, in the basic sound sets that are just lies. I actually prefer to leave my computer playing back really bad sound because it helps me remember that it's a lie, but it does mean that all the demos are hopeless. I think the other one that's really important is the rhythmic ease, because the computer doesn't need to fill an internalized pulse or have it feel, you know, like it makes sense with what's going on around me. And that's just something to stay really, really alert to. One thing that may be helpful is to play all the parts on some instrument you're not good at. So if you've tried it on something that you're still struggling with, you'll pick up more of those things. Now, there may be things in your skill set, you know, like rhythmic reading or something that you won't be able to have that problem with. But yeah, it doesn't hurt to just dump yourself in the empathy end a little bit. So when we did this workshop live back in January, or something like this workshop, I think I had everybody come and play something they didn't play well. That was quite enlightening. So, yes. Yeah. Yeah, because you just, there's a lot of that's felt by having your hands just not go the right place. Oh yeah, I'm having to think too hard about what is that? Oh, come on. Where's the move ahead thing? Here we go. Sometimes it works from the keyboard. So I've shared the email I got from Aparampus about arranging and copyright yesterday. They will go up on the website, their new stuff about that, but they don't have anything at the moment. And Jerome, who's in education, said please contact him, and his email's on that. So just letting you know I've done that. So as a thought exercise, arranging Happy Birthday for your most challenging ensemble. Yeah, back to thinking who they are. Will it require some new skills? Do I want it to require some new skills? What style? What are the essential roles that we need to cover to get across that style? And range and keys. So this is tailoring it totally to your purposes. which means that you can maybe, you know, write something that involves the flutes that's not a flat key. And merge them with your string players, but make that trombone player, you know, trombone player can find it. You know, what are the things that you want to accomplish with it? Happy Birthday is a tricky melody. And that's, you know, everybody knows it, but it's a tricky melody. It's got a fairly wide range. It's an octave. It's got a dotted rhythm in it. It starts on an anacrusis. I used to give this occasionally to my oral skills students on exams to write it without reference to anything, and most of them got it wrong because there's surprises in it. It's got a pause in the middle. You've got to figure out what to do with. So there's a few challenges there. But let's say I'm going to do this for my hypothetical dream ensemble of flute and beginning violin and euphonium and bass guitar, and what else should we have? Maybe piano accordion. And given that that's what I've got, I've just decided I'm going to do it klezmer. And so it's got to have some oompahs. And I'm going to do it in a minor key. So now no one will know the melody right. And they're going to have some funny intervals. Or maybe I'll do it in the Frege one rather than minor. So it's got the flat second and the major third, and that's just weird. So we're not going to use a key signature. I think that I'll probably go ahead and start with the oompahs and the euphonium, but I might like to move that down the track because that's a little stereotypically. Wouldn't it be fun to have the oompahs someplace else? The accordion, of course, can play the chords, and it's got the best odds of blending with my ensemble because getting my flute and violin and euphonium to blend on chords is going to be tricky. Put the euphonium off stage, but that's probably not good classroom management. So I've got to you know, decide what key this is going to be in. Is it going to be for sing-along? Yeah, it probably is. In which case, I think we'll probably do it in, so the lowest notes, the B below the treble clef stave, that's going to be the fifth. It's going to be E Frege now. So it's going to have F naturals. That'll probably work for the violin. The flute player might like that. So those are kind of some of the kinds of things I would be thinking about in terms of how to put it together. Probably this essential ingredients then are going to be a bit of oompah. Something's going to have to do some offbeats, and there's the tune. That's enough. With that ensemble, I don't think I'll even harmonize the melody, but I need to reinforce it because they're not as strong. So perhaps the flute and the violin get it together. If my accordion player is good enough, we might switch and just, you know, have the accordion player do the melody too, and the violin does the offbeats. If I put it in a better key, I could have done it on open strings, but you know, I didn't think that through quite well enough, but maybe we can make it work with the E and the B as a double stop. So I guess, yeah, so that's all I'm going to do is, you know, for this, you know, these 2 seconds here is throw that out as, you know, beginnings of ways of thinking about it. It could be largely learned by rote. It's going to be tricky to learn the melody because I've changed it, because I've decided it's not going to be in quite the major scale. So that would probably have to be written out, but probably also demonstrated or sung so they believe the weird notes are right. But, you know, oompah you could do without reading on the stage. A UFO player is likely to be a reader, but, you know, on the page. But if I was doing with a bass guitar player, maybe I wouldn't need to start there. You know, we could add the notation for it later. So thinking about what's practical for the time. But maybe, you know, learning to read that is important. So then writing it down is going to be essential. Because this is probably, you know, something that's got to be whipped up together fairly quickly for the principal's birthday or something. So, Yeah, so for the flute to really carry that melody, I've got to put it in a register where it's going to cut. It's got to be up higher. It's got to be in that second octave. You might want to keep the accordion out of the way there. Make sure that that's below. And maybe, there's a quiet section so the violin can do its offbeats and it's still heard. Those are the kind of challenges. It's like, how are we going to manage this? The way I'd be thinking about that. That's very off the top of my head. I did not plan this part on purpose, which was probably really dangerous, but I thought I'm going to leave it there. We can kind of go back to questions and observations and improvements. And let you jump in. So that's what I prepared to throw at you, and I'll offer whatever else, or good to hear from what your experiences are. Over to you, if there are any of you.
Don't forget to take yourself off mute if you do want to chat.
It works better. Yep.
Hi, Karlin. I teach in a secondary setting, and our music unit was Baroque this term, and predominantly the classroom is full of students who play rock and pop music, and I've got one student who is death metal inclined. And he came to me and said, I'd like my new instrument to be learning how to scream. And I was like, okay.
Sure. Purcell, we're on there. Yeah. No.
So we used Bach's Air on the G string, and it took them about 3 weeks to stop laughing at the name of the piece.
Yeah.
Fun. But then I introduced them to Jethro Tull's version of Bourrée, and they were so excited about that. And then their task was to do a Baroque composition following sonata form. Because I've taken over this kind of unit of work, I'm just kind of following along the normal teaching before I start tweaking. But it was interesting. My students who the previous term had composed these amazing pop pieces were frightened to put some crotchets and quavers on a page. And I was quite astounded at that. So what we ended up doing was getting a whole lot of sheet music. And I said, go and learn 4 bars, just choose 4 bars. And so off they went. And then I said, now take the rhythm and change the notes. Yeah. And then they started to compose, but I ended up having to compose my own Baroque piece in sonata form and show them step by step by step. And I really find that even our students these days, you ask them to go and play a piece of music that they find the tab for, easy. You ask them to create their own piece of music, it's like there's a whole gap in or loss of creativity. But if I asked my year 3-4 students a few years ago to create a soundscape based on a trip around Australia, off they went, and their imagination. So how do we, I guess this is a question for everyone here, how do we kind of take away that, or probably more inspire that creativity within our students, that they just need to start somewhere instead of saying, no, it's too hard, it's too difficult, I'm out?
There's an enormous amount of fear in particularly the secondary students. I think that I've noticed a huge change in, and I think that those techniques of transforming something rather than generating as the entry point is probably that's shrewd and in a good way in. But to make a situation where it's safe enough, and somehow, because they're really aware of external standards of what's good, and they're not aware of how you get there, to make a place where it's safe enough to experiment and stuff it up. And it may mean that you need to, one of the things that's used to help, and I don't know if you've got if they can be sending it up rather than creating something. There's a, sometimes silliness gives permission, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes that's actually, equally threatening. But yeah, I'm sure other people have great yeah, and definitely modeling the process is certainly going through that journey with them in small steps, and then hiding your version so they can't copy it. So they dare to imagine, now do one with from here. But it's that fear is huge these days. Yeah. There's some good clues there. Yeah.
And if you can stick to the same bit of music and then just change one thing, so you focus on, okay, let's keep those same pitches, we'll change the rhythm, or we'll keep that rhythm, we'll change the pitches, or let's do the same pitches and rhythm, but we'll make it louder, we'll make it softer. If you just take one change, then they'll get the concept of, oh, that's what that is. Oh, that's what that is. It's not just overwhelming all of it at once.
Yeah. Okay, just a quick heads up. We've just got a couple of more minutes to go before we'll have to wind up.
I'll just move to the last slide so you can look at it, but there's nothing to say. Thank you is the slide. I noticed I didn't fix the tangle. So.
I think the tangle is a very good description of what we deal with every day, probably in the classroom and probably in our heads before we try and create something for the students.
Yeah. Yes.
So if we can untangle it and go one thread at a time, that's probably the way to go. Yep.
Enjoy it, yeah.
Yep. Okay, thank you, folks. We'll make a move so that people can move off to other talks that are starting soon. Just two reminders. One is that the links, remember, to the video and things will still be available back on the website if you want to go back and re-listen. Karlin, if there's anything you want for us to upload, let us know and we'll put that up there for people to access. And tonight's concert, we'd love to see you at that if you're available, either live or online. That'd be great.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone.